Hello and welcome to Dateline London. The Pope says the world is at war, but not over religion. Is he right? Is Hillary Clinton, as President Obama put it, the best qualified candidate, male or female, ever to run for the US presidency? And will being qualified actually help her against the non-politician Donald Trump? Plus, the Olympics, a festival of sport or a festival of cheating and performance-enhancing drugs? My guests today are the writer and broadcasters Jeffrey Kaufman, Nabila Ramdani, who's a French-Algerian journalist, Yasmin Alabai-Brown, writer and commentator, and Mihir Bose. Very good to see you. Well, it doesn't take courage or skill for two 19-year-olds armed with knives to murder an unarmed 86-year-old man. Following the attack on an elderly Catholic priest, Jacques Hamel, in Normandy, Pope Francis commented that the world is at war, but not over religion, over money and resources. So is he right? And are the French media organisations wise to decide not to carry pictures of terrorists to avoid posthumously glorifying what are fundamentally cowardly actions? In terms of the world at war over resources, I mean, is that how people see it, or is it more that they see two kind of deranged people on the fringes of French society who carried out this act?
Well, I think the Pope is really making a more general comment. He's a modern Pope, as it were, and he needs to be a media player, so he needs to come up with, you know, short, sharp sound bites, as it were, as opposed to the more intellectual work that he produces in any way. And I think he's absolutely right that the world is always at war and has been for thousands of years. And it has been often over religion, often over other factors, such as the balance of power. And of course, nowadays, religion is less prominent in Western societies. And I think His Holiness is absolutely right to argue that money and resources are more likely to motivate aggressions by countries such as America and Russia, rather than religion, for example. That's why we have expressions such as oil wars, and why we have the US military-industrial complex that is so influential in the world nowadays, and it supports countries that bolster its mindset, its materialistic mindset. Now, at the other end of the scale, however, I think it's also fair to say that a lack of power and resources is also what motivates people in countries such as Iraq and Afghanistan to take up arms against occupying forces. I think economics is arguably, you know, the primary human factor in history, and nothing much has changed.
What do you make of it?
With all due respect to His Holiness, I think he's using his pulpit to try to define this conflict. And while it's not necessarily religion per se, I don't think it's about resources and economics per se either. It's really culture, whether culture is religion or values. It is this inability of France and other countries to reconcile Western country with its very large immigrant population, population from the Middle East or from North Africa, who have not assimilated, who have been really marginalized for the last 50, 60 years. And so while he may say it's not religion, it has a religious origin, it has a religious cultural origin.
You have to look at the facts, however, Jeff. You know, the fact that, you know, none of them, of those involved, are particularly religious. They're often mentally ill.
That's why I say culture, because I think it gets complex as to whether
France's terror threat has more to do with its own criminal underclass.
But that's why I wondered why
else.
the context of this, as a general statement about wars over resources, undoubtedly that's correct. But coming after a couple of 19-year-olds murder in the most horrible way an 86-year-old guy, who happened to be a priest, that did seem to be kind of giving a grandiose statement about something which was no better than street corner thugs, really.
Yes, I think so, and I think, you know, there's a tendency to perhaps glorify or to build these street thugs as, you know, this huge enemy force or sophisticated enemy force. There's nothing sophisticated about what is in the end a very cowardly and barbaric act.
Jasmine?
Yeah, I do so agree with actually both of you, but I think it's just not possible in today's world to say it's got nothing to do with religion. It's just not possible. There is something happening in the Islamic world that is terrifying, and it comes from Saudi Arabia. The sources are our allies. That's where some of this is coming from. I just don't think it's wise to say at this moment, yes, some of these people were mentally ill, some of them were bad, not mad. We've got to admit that there are some pretty awful people living everywhere. But the religious motivation that is planted in the heads of young people, some of them from quite middle-class families, You know, I don't know why. I don't know why it's happening, but it is the religious fervour that is being injected into the heads of people who were born here.
What do you make of it?
I would agree with Yasmin, and I think it doesn't help to describe it as war. Because you have a military situation of a kind, you know, that these people are taking violent action. If you describe it as war, then the next step is to have censorship, you have to all, you know, this sort of war language which politicians use is a sort of instinctive thing which doesn't help.
Well, the war on drugs, how has that been going?
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. And the other thing is, and what we have to look at is the alienation factor, because some of them are second, third generation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Why do they feel, I know second, third generation Bangladeshis, and, you know, who do not know Tagore, who do not know what is a cultural, which is what their parents would have come from. This is a man, Tagore, who's written the anthem of India and Bangladesh, and they don't know him. So what has gone wrong where they don't know their historic, if you like, ancestral culture, and they do not feel part of this culture? And that is something that we need to, and that enough attention is not paid to that.
Do you see echoes of that in France, that people are dissociated from their ancestral culture and they're not fully integrated, as Jeff says, in modern French culture?
But the Prime Minister of France, Manuel Valls, often speaks about those ethnic minorities who are segregated. They live, he said, he speaks about an economic, social and territorial apartheid in France. But there's never any action by the government to actually make sure that they're included and they're part and parcel of the fabric of French society. Now, of course, there's some radicalization going on, but, you know, we're essentially dealing about very angry young men with criminal backgrounds who take on this fantastical cause because they have nothing much to look forward to beyond prison. And, you know, you can take up any cause and turn it into a murderous cause. I mean, secularism was the most murderous ideology of the 20th century. In Stalinism, Nazism, you know, you can take anything and turn it into a cause.
But to get to the point about religious warfare here, this is, whether the Pope likes it or not, this has the potential, if it's not already, to become that. Because this is, one man died in a church in a small town in France. This, you know, remember, in January 2015, there was a terrorist attack on a kosher kosher grocery store. The attack on Jewish targets in France is almost expected. But to go to the heart of this Catholic nation, a small town church, does set the otherness of all of this, and it plays into the extremism of Marine Le Pen.
What it shows is that anybody is a target as far as these criminals.
Yes, but we're being played.
You know,
You can't ignore the fact that in the Middle East, we still have an explosive situation. So these people have a link, if you like. I mean, what was the last time the Caliphate came up? It came up when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And, you know, even Gandhi then supported Caliphate for political reasons. So let's face it, the Caliphate in that sense is a huge symbol for some Muslims.
No, but they use a deeply corrupt version of religion and indeed political.
I'm not denying that, but the fact is it is there.
I don't think we can get away with avoiding the central issue. We have a problem. We Muslims in the West, all around the world, there isn't a single Muslim state, right, where there is proper democracy, proper accountability, where citizens feel safe.
But
not
I'm
one.
afraid you conflate in lots of separate issues. We're talking about French individuals who are born in France.
Can I just finish? Can I finish? Please allow me to finish. We cannot get away from the fact that, as I get a lot of emails from young Muslims saying, all I feel is shame. At the moment, all I feel is shame. There is part of that going on. And also the double standards. You know, US bombs recently, in the last 2 weeks, killed hundreds of civilians, right? Hundreds of civilians, dropped them in civilian areas. Young Muslims, especially the most intelligent and watchful ones, are consumed with the idea of double standards. So all kinds of angers, it's not just criminality or mental illness, which are part of it, all kinds of other readings
but all
are
of this
going
is
on.
playing into the polarization of politics, whether it's Donald Trump or Nigel Farage or Marine Le Pen, and these terrorist acts are designed to create extremism and a backlash.
In that sense.
And I agree with the view on the double standards. For example, now we're hearing from the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, who wants to prevent foreign fundings for mosques in France. His fabricated assumption is that Islam is the cause of terrorism. Now, he can't have it both ways. He can't point the fingers at the Saudis saying, we don't want your money in French mosques, and yet sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, which helps fuels conflict in Syria and indeed Yemen, and indeed support groups like Daesh.
Well, it's not just France, it's US and UK. Our allies, they are our allies.
Well, let's move on. Because the British people, we were told during the referendum on European Union membership, are tired of experts. Perhaps the American people are somewhat tired too, in which case Barack Obama's endorsement of Hillary Clinton as the best qualified candidate for the White House may not help her very much. In the week of her nomination as the Democratic Party candidate, do we think Hillary Clinton really can become the first female president of the United States? Yes.
I hope she can. I hope not necessarily because I think, you know, it's the female argument, though it would be a very good thing. We have a female prime minister. The woman I most admire in the world today is Angela Merkel. You know, I really do. I wish I could live in Berlin. Please don't email and tell me to go. But one of the things, though, is you're right. There is this kind of extraordinary reaction against the educated, expert, the political class, and so on. And people want something raw. And boy, have they got raw meat in Trump, have they not? So I think there is a real risk.
Mia?
Well, it's very interesting to watch the two conventions. The Democratic convention was a conventional convention, if you like. Hillary came towards the end, though she did turn up the day before when Barack Obama spoke. Whereas the Republican convention was a one-man show. But, you know, Trump was there all the time. You would know more about this. But conventions used to be where the candidate, the presumptive candidate, came at the last moment and was crowned. And we have this phenomenon. And it seems that the American people have decided that their politics don't work, so they will go for a so-called millionaire or billionaire or whatever he is, who's very successful in business. Doesn't matter what he says, and they seem to think that once he gets into the White House, he'll appoint the right expert so that the country will run well. I mean, which is an extraordinary idea to me.
I think that there are two possible routes here. Trump could triumph here in a close race. But if Hillary Clinton, as we saw signs on Thursday night, if she can define him rather than having him define her, you know, these infantile tweets that came out yesterday and today, crooked Hillary was at it again. He hasn't offered an agenda. It's all schoolyard bullying. It's all 140 character silliness. She started to define him, and she made it clear that he is a dangerous choice. She has to persuade the voters of that. But he's doing a pretty good job of helping her.
But in the Republican primary, his opponents tried to define him,
absolutely.
And he beat all of them. So there's no guarantee that he can't do the same with Hillary.
But he continues to put his foot in his mouth, and at some point, listen.
But why do people? I mean, why do so many people, according to opinion polls? I mean, the complicated way in which presidents are elected we can get to in a sec. But the opinion polls show he's either neck and neck or slightly ahead. So if he puts his foot in his mouth all the time, as many people think, that's the so-called experts. You see, it plays into that narrative.
Because traditional politics here in the UK, in the US, is not serving a huge swath of the middle class, the lower middle class, whatever term you want to use. And those people feel that the opportunities of the 21st century, we've talked about it around this table before, have passed them by. Brexit is very much an expression of that, and Donald Trump is very much an expression of that. What Hillary
wants to take it back to the old white world, doesn't he? To an extent?
He wants to take it back to a world that never exists, just as some of the...
Well, the two slogans, aren't they? We want our country back, said the Brexiters.
Right.
We want to make America great again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these simple-minded slogans seem to have a potency I never thought possible.
But this week, Hillary Clinton finally pointed out that did America cease to be great?
Yeah.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
The context.
That's the good one.
And that's where the pushback.
That is the pushback. And if Americans think, when did our country cease to be great? They may conclude that it's still a great country.
I think she's still very much in the running, and I think, you know, after a very messy beginning to the week with the Bernie Sanders people booing her agenda and booing her, she managed to pull the party together. She's not a terrific orator, but her speech on Thursday pressed almost all the buttons she needed to. She showed some humanity, she showed some vision, but importantly, she started to define Trump.
What do you think?
Well, I disagree, because I've spent a couple of years teaching in Michigan, and it's one of those upper Midwest states that are so crucial to Trump. It's essentially Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. and they are traditionally Democrat states, and they are increasingly turning a Republican red, meaning that Trump's victory can be within reach. And I have a lot of friends who live there, male and female, and they absolutely despise Hillary Clinton. They view her as an old has-been who should have retired years ago with her millions of dollars. They see her as a thoroughly dishonest politician who is greedy, and there's a... And of course, in principle, having the first woman president in the US could be a very good thing. But why does it have to be the dodgy wife, the dodgy wife of a former dodgy
But is she
president?
really dodgy, or is that just that, as Bill Clinton, I think, very importantly said, there are two Hillarys, the caricature and the real one. And I'm sorry,
really
but the
banana
evidence of her
Republic feel.
dodginess versus Trump's university fraud and his business fraud, I mean,
But she's careless to have your own email server.
Absolutely, she's made some colossal mistakes, which she will pay for.
But you would have thought that Trump effectively saying it would be good if the Russians were to bug the president. That would have cost him dearly, but it doesn't seem to have. And I wondered whether, is the people, the states that you're talking about are states which touch into what Jeff was talking about, which is, fairly disenfranchised middle-class or working-class people from the car industry and the steel industry and other things who haven't got a job and don't think they've got a future.
Well, absolutely. And so when Donald Trump goes into those states and promises that if he's become president, Apple will have to have, its factories in America as opposed to China, that cars will have to be produced in America as opposed to Mexico, then he speaks to those people. He's offering them job and a prospect of, making America great.
Even if people think it's nonsense, though. I mean, the experts would say you cannot tell Apple where to put its factory.
You can't, but it's important, Gavin, to correct just who these people are. It's not that they're unemployed. Unemployment in the U.S. has actually gone down, and what's extraordinary is, remember, Obama came in 2008 when the economy was in a tailspin, and the economy in the U.S. is quite strong. These people actually have jobs. They're working at Walmart during the day, and then they go and work at KFC or McDonald's at night. They're carrying two jobs just to stay afloat, and they're barely staying afloat. That's the resentment.
Well, but that was the same with the Brexit vote. There are people who feel left behind by globalization, but at the heart of both of those is a very, very frightening anti-immigrant sentiment that Trump is buying into. And I do agree with what Nabila said about, reservations about Hillary Clinton. I share some of them. But my God, when this man talks about Mexicans and Muslims and the other in the open way he does, it is the lesser of the two evils.
Haven't things changed in America? Gerald Ford was supposed to have lost the election because he didn't know that Eastern Europe was under the rule of the communists, right? Trump says the Mexicans will build the wall, and the Mexicans have said they're not going to build the wall. But that doesn't seem to affect his popularity.
He's getting away with this kind of rhetoric, and what's interesting about this, and Gavin, it's to your question, that's so changed in America, is that even his supporters don't actually believe that the Mexicans will pay for that wall. They're not even. I think a lot of people, it shows, don't believe he'll actually build the wall. But the metaphor and the rhetoric are what they like. And it's not that they're being suckered into believing that this wall that would cost billions will be financed by a country that can.
I mean, I really do despair that the world's only superpower has only Trump and Clinton to offer. That's very depressing indeed.
You sound like an American voter, actually. I've looked at the polls, and they do suggest a lot of people are in that position.
But I'd much rather have a more talented and credible Democrat candidate against Trump. And dare I say, I really don't like the kind of politicians who have been defeated in the past and can come back and have another bash. We see a lot of that in French politics. But the truth is, Hillary has been defeated by Obama because she was far less popular, far less credible, and here she goes again having another.
But we are where we are, and actually now the bigger threat to the world actually is Donald Trump.
No, I would dispute that, because I think in terms of the safety and the stability of the rest of the world, Hillary Clinton could be a much more dangerous prospect than Donald Trump, because his foreign policy is absolutely clear. He will withdraw into some sort of Republican isolationism, whereas we know that Clinton is a warmonger. She will antagonize. She will continue. She will continue Obama's aggressive drone policies. She will antagonize Putin and Iran. she will, she pushed for, she
Well,
voted for
Obama
the
didn't
war in
antagonize Iran. Iran was
But should
brought
she be
into the
faulted for
fold.
calling Putin what he was? I mean,
No,
this
no,
is
no,
you know,
no,
this is
no,
this
I
is
don't
this is
think
believed
so.
to be the reason why
She
the
recklessly
Russians have
pushed
hacked
Obama
into
to
her
intervene in
computers.
Libya, leading directly to the murder of the U.S. ambassador.
we will-
and she can't be trusted to pour more money and
I'm
arms
sorry,
into,
I hope Trump
into
is
Israel
listening.
as well.
He might offer you a job, Nabila.
He's about to tweet.
I'm by no means understating how dangerous that man is. I'm just talking about,
yes.
foreign policy.
Right, let's move on, because I was going to cheer us all up by talking about the Olympics and how wonderful it's going to be, but having seen what's happened about dope testing and so on, I mean, it is a tarnished affair, is it not?
I think this Rio Olympics is probably going to be the most difficult. In the past, we've always had before the Olympics, will the stadiums be right, will this be built and so on. First of all, some of the stadiums and some people haven't even gone into the athletes' village because it's not ready. But the fact of doping is, and the fact of doping with sport is, yes, there's been sporting corruption, but that is brown envelopes being exchanged. When you have doping, you mean you cannot absolutely believe in sport. The basis of sport is the myth and magic. Usain Bolt may be the greatest runner in the world, but when he lines up, you can still hope that somebody will beat him. Now you watch the race and you don't know who is on drugs, who is not on drugs, and that destroys the whole basis of sport.
That's true, isn't it? You have to trust that this is people by their own talent and grit and perseverance, they're winning.
Yeah, well, I mean,
rather
the
than
whole
chemistry.
business of the Olympics, whether you look at international football, everything's been corrupted by money. Everything. There is no sports anymore. Actually.
Even cricket, actually,
Even
which is even cricket meter.
The greatest of moral games.
I think the Olympics. I think you're right. I think the Olympics are different from international football, American baseball, because this is an international collective based on a concept of ideals. And when Pierre de Coubertin began the modern Olympics in 1896, that's what he talked about. It wasn't simply about winning; it was how you fought
And bringing nations together.
That's right. And so it was really an enlightened way to unite
look
the world.
Happened. Even those who are chosen to host the Olympics, the corruption goes all the way, really.
But you see, what we've seen with Russia is a sort of state-dominated, drug taking, which we haven't seen since the days of the East Germans, and on a very big scale. Even the Russian Secret Service was involved, making sure that the observers were not there. I mean, that is something fantastic.
But the money point is, you can't offend the Russians or anybody who's too powerful because there's so much money at stake in the Olympics.
And also, the other thing is that the Olympic movement is very interesting. We talk to members of the IOC, they say it's our sport, and they want the whole world to be there. So one of the decisions they take is based on the fact that they have to cozy up to politicians in a way that, in the past they probably didn't do.
Do you know, in Rio, there'll be a new oath for the athletes in which they have to swear that they will not dope or take drugs. I mean, this is where the world has come
what
to.
they mean is they won't take drugs now. They've taken drugs already.
We must never forget the Romanian team. Do you remember? With the wonderful young athletes.
Olga Korbut.
And then you find out how much was going on. It's not new. This thing is
but
not
also
new.
part of it, I think, de Coubertin created a system where people compete as individuals. What we have now is Team GB, the Russians, and so it's become very much a patriotic thing rather than simply individuals. It's not just individuals competing.
Yes, but I think my general view is that I've always thought of the Tour de France as having the very best PR unit in the world, because despite years of symbolic drug scandals, it always comes back every year as if nothing untoward has happened.
Well, now the British person has won it. Everybody in Britain loves the Tour de France. It's one of the few things apparently we can win.
But my fear is that the Olympics are going down, the exactly same way, and I have to say that letting the Russians compete in the Rio Olympics is like having Lance Armstrong back into the Tour de France. And it makes the whole event, it turns it into a laughing stock.
But it's the way the politicians have used sport. When Obama first came as president here, what did he and Cameron do? They played table tennis. And people judged them and how good they were playing. That was something that Clem Attlee or Winston Churchill wouldn't have done. I can't imagine Winston Churchill playing table tennis with President Roosevelt if he could have played. That sort of thing. And that is where I think sport is now. I mean, when I grew up, I read from the back pages. I'm interested in sport. But now it's on the front pages. It's, politicians have taken over. And Putin plays this game brilliantly, if you can call it brilliantly. He got Sochi the Winter Games. Sochi was actually an artificial city he built, where there were 3 churches. The question after the games was if after the games people would start praying, They probably needed to pray.
One solution solution would be to allow everybody to take as many drugs as they want, and then we'll know everybody's on the same level.
Can I say, in a desperate attempt to end this programme on a happy note, that the 2012 Olympics in London, it was all going to be terrible, the traffic was going to be awful, it was going to be a disaster. It was brilliant. It was really good
It was
fun.
a triumph. I covered it. It was really a thrill.
It was really good.
Well,
So
I think
Brazil
once
will
the
be
games
fine.
start and we get some great results and things like that, and Usain Bolt again does his stuff, you know, we'll all feel yes.
And remember what we thought we were 4 years ago and what Britain has since become.
What happened to the feel-good factor?
What do you mean, the feel-good factor on this programme? I think you've just killed it.
Sorry, I'm a depressive.
Thanks very much. And enjoy Berlin, won't you? That's it for Dateline London. You can, of course, comment on the programme on Twitter and engage with our guests on Twitter too. We're back next week at the same time. Please make a date with Dateline London. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.